I don't know. I honestly don't know what to say. If comedy is tragedy plus time, I need more time. But I would really settle for less.
Parisi Palace at 2919 East Broadway. This is the Jake Feinberg Show. Thank you so much for being part of the program today. We just heard from Dr. John, and he'll be playing live on Tuesday evening at the Fox Theater here in Tucson, Mac Rebenak. When I started my show 4 years ago, it was with the understanding of taking my native gifts and doing positive, inspirational work, building a brand which at its core is about substance over style. First, I had to develop my investigative journalistic chops, which had been dormant since Boston University in the late 90s. And then I had to find my voice, which really means having the nuts to ask questions of intelligent people about things that most aren't comfortable talking about in private. I have connected on a very personal level with the greatest musicians of the past and present, the deepest hang with cats like Steve Gadd and Bernard Purdie, who are holding down Rudy Van Gelders' fort in Englewood Cliffs, or the drum chair at Mikells on the Upper West Side, strutting their stuff with the late, great Richard T. My guest today has built his brand by staying on the cutting edge of giving people what they want. Give the people what they want. Let the body dance, be it MTV or South Park, even Camp MTV. But his business acumen has been shaped by his love of music, a love that was instilled in him by his mother, who went wherever there was rhythm. My guest saw the world at an early age, the third world to the second power that his mom showed to him and his siblings, helping them shape their views on social justice, tolerance, and dignity. The harder the blues, the harder it swings, be it Carnival in Trinidad, or the steel pan bands and the calypso that ultimately turned into ska. He is a music fanatic, going to see the Night Tripper or catching the last Allman Brothers show with their manager Bert Holman. Holman. That name sounds familiar. That's right, Scatico your face. The nexus between Bill and James, boys' side and girls' side, 1A, 1B, and now 1C. My guest's name is emblazoned in the social hall where chicken fights of Color Wars past conjure up memories of Flick sermons, lazy days, and the College Bowl gold rush. My guest went to college in Boston just like this host, except my guest came on the scene when radio broadband was cheap. On a fledgling FM radio station at Emerson, my guest was heard round midnight in the late 70s playing Rastafari with a side of oxtail. Going into Dorchester and Roxbury, finding the cats who were playing dub reggae, scratching out Lee Perry, Junior Mervyn, and brother Bob Marley. My guest has been masterful at identifying talented writers, hosts, producers, entertainers, accompanists, if you will, who when put together create witty, relevant programming that to its credit delivers the news more authentically than the strained major networks who placate institutions that have lost the trust of the American people no matter what their color. You see it today in the streets of New York and Philadelphia and Los Angeles, where young people can't breathe and are trying to find the next leaders of social justice. Because leaders have vision, like my guest, who was able to identify talent and creativity not yet in its fullest form. He trusts his gut and knows that you cannot do everything the best, that in fact there are others who can complement you and take something trendy and make it iconic. MTV, Beavis and Butthead, The Colbert Report, The Daily Show, South Park. These are not shows that last a few years and fizzle out. These shows are the gold standard of television entertainment. It's that point of view. To know more is there than meets the eye. Being rock steady, because the harder they come, the harder they fall, one and all. Doug Herzog, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Wow, Jake, that was pretty awesome, man. I don't even know how to follow that. I just want to sit here and listen for a while.
Well, I can keep going. I mean, it's thank you so much for taking the time today, man.
Well, thank you. Really happy to be here.
You know, I wanted to ask you straight out, your mom was a pretty riveting force and a huge music fan. And I wanted to ask you, the fact that she exposed you to all these roots musics all over the world at an early age, did that help shape your views on human rights and social justice?
Well, that was really more about my mom. My mom was a she was born and raised Paterson, New Jersey. Lived there, well into her 40s. If you don't know Paterson, New Jersey, it's the town where that film Lean on Me takes place. Principal Joe Clark, Reuben Hurricane Carter was from Paterson. So that's how a lot of people know. But Paterson was, a tough place, and it was a crumbling small urban environment just outside of New York City. And my mom was very, very loyal to Paterson and extremely dedicated to Paterson, and she was involved in a lot of civic activities. She got caught up in the civil rights movement. I mean, she really tried to save the place, in a certain regard, all by herself. And so I watched her, give a lot of her time, give a lot of her effort, help others. And, she just had a very particular way of living her life, and, it certainly had an influence on me. Well, as I like to say, given all that, I went into showbiz. But, it did leave a big impression on me, and obviously as parents shape us, had a lot to do with who I am. And I've tried to bring, look, I'm in showbiz, right? So it's show business. We're not in this to save the world, but I have certainly taken a lot of the things that I got from my mom and my dad in that regard, and sort of it's part of me, and when it's applicable, it's become part of what I do in show business.
Could you give an example of one of those things?
Look, I mean, the MTV years, we were very invested in the pro-social issues, and whether it was Choose or Lose, which was to get people in register, young people getting involved, register to vote, whether it was putting Pedro Zamora on The Real World and bringing the first first story, I think, really on national television of somebody who was living in real time with HIV and the AIDS virus. Just a lot of different things, over the years. But you have to balance that, right? Because again, I'm in this to entertain people, and
Right.
When you can entertain and inform, that's great. But at the end of the day, we're here to entertain. So it's always a balance. But it's had it has certainly had an impact, but not to the extent that I ever decided I needed to be in public radio, for instance.
Of course, no. I think as I've chronicled it, I just look at your mother as just one of the hippest cats. I mean, she really was.
She was a pretty hip lady. She really was. I mean, she was ahead of her time. She was one of a kind. She was a force of nature, and through her, my house was like one of those houses where everybody came. I mean, it was Black Panthers, it was abused mothers groups, it was people, it was educators, it was thieves, it was pimps.
Wow.
It was politicians. Reuben Hurricane Carter ate dinner in my dining room one night. It was one of those houses. You just never know who was going to be there, who was living there. My mom was always taking folks in, and we just grew up in a very interesting environment. And Paterson was a very diverse place, and very culturally diverse. So, I really look back on my childhood as something kind of really cool and special.
I played that Bruce track. I mean, I know that Springsteen, meeting across the river. I know Bruce has a spot in your heart and most Scataconians. I don't rely that heavily on the boss, but I was going to ask you on that Born to Run album, do you know who plays bass on that album?
I would assume it's Gary Talent, but
it actually, I believe you're going to.
If I'm wrong, I'm not sure who it would be then.
Well, it's a guy that you probably know. His name Richard Davis is Stravinsky's favorite bass player, most recorded bass player. I mean, and nobody really knows that. A jazzer out of Chicago. And the reason I bring it up is because to show you where my head was at 3 years ago on my program, Doug, I interviewed Richard. And I wanted to talk about his career, but he wanted to talk about something else. So I want to play this for you and then come back and get your thoughts on it, okay?
Sure.
The first institutionalized racism was slavery, and it's remained the same since that day. We've modernized slavery. Because what I'm talking about now and what we're referring to started in 1452. Nothing has been changed. And you can look through the recycling of historical decades and notice that what was happening then is happening now. And I might say, in reference to you being Jewish, I'm sure you can say the same thing, that what was happening to Jewish people many, many years ago is still happening to some of them today.
All right. Well, he took me to the woodshed 3 years ago, but you know, we opened up with one of your employees, John Stewart, really flummoxed and a loss for words about these systems that are sort of not working well. And then you got Richard Davis on here 3 years ago. I was really trying to go after that, and to hear this, that it goes back hundreds of years. That's really what I was trying to get at, is Doug Herzog as a person, because we can only do what we can do as people. Talk about the leaders, especially in the music community, that you saw, the reggae cats growing up. How do people coalesce and become true leaders of real social movements?
You know, it's a combination of things, right? You know, it's somebody, well, you know, in on this side, right, you have to have a lot of talent, right? So if you're John Stewart, you have an enormous amount of talent, and then you hone a vision as you go along. You figure out you're funny, and then you figure out how, you know, to, you know, combine your intelligent point of view into, you know, the funny part to get across a message. It's probably to a certain degree the same way with musicians. You know, if you're Bob Marley, you figure out I can write a song, and I've got some musical talent, and now I've actually got something to say, and I think I can put it into this song. And then you got to stand up and do it, right, and go for it. And so that's what these guys do, and that's ultimately how they emerge. You know, the combination of, you know, the entertainment value is there, and then what they're saying really resonates with people. And you know, it's a rare and you know, for lack of a better term, magical thing. And that's why there's only one John Stewart. There'll only be one Bob Marley. You know, there's only one Bob Dylan. But and by the way, many people who come in their wakes and try and are doing good things and great things. But there are those who emerge at the top.
And there's only one Doug Herzog, and you have done a huge amount of work with a lot.
I would not put myself.
Well, no, but I mean,
of any of those, I would not be mentioned the same breath as any of those people.
Well,
but,
I mean,
look, I've been a very, very fortunate guy in my business. I get to do something I really, really like. I've got to combine and bring my interest to it. I've been able to, you know, I get to go to bed every night and you know that John Stewart is on the air at Comedy Central, and that's a really good thing, and that makes me feel good. But it's all John, man. You know, it's I just get to sit back and watch and be proud, but of having made the right choice, you know, many years ago. But you know, it's all John. I'm just happy to be in his shadow.
No, I mean, we know. I mean, he's been just on fire, and he's succinct, and I think it's really a credit to Comedy Central that in times like this they can actually deliver authentic news in a much more appropriate way than the media networks, like I said.
Well, John's been doing it for a long time, and the whole game has shifted in turn. The whole news game is really evolving. You know, newspapers are kind of going away, and what's happening in digital and social media is sort of emerging, and voices outside of the mainstream, which was considered, let's call it, just like newspapers and network television and cable news, to a certain extent, have emerged, like John, and now in a lot of different places beyond that. And it's all, the world is changing. Look, our job at the end of the day at Comedy Central, we're not really, as much as it might seem like that, we're really about making people laugh. So if we can do that through the news, that's great. But we always, as we say at Comedy Central, it's funny first, right? It's got to be funny first. We're always trying to make you laugh first, and if there's something else that comes along with that, great. But I mean, make you laugh. We're not afraid of a good fart joke either.
No, I'll tell you something though. I mean, there's a reason why NBC came after him to replace David Gregory. I mean, he is a legitimate.
Well, yeah, John. I mean, John can do that. There's no question about it. I mean, he's that smart and he's that talented, and but John, I think John's most interested in still being funny first, right? So I think he still considers himself an entertainer and comedian first, and a a news person or a advocate or a social observer, probably second. But yeah, could he do that? Of course.
A lot of people may not be aware out there as we're talking to Doug Herzog, who's the president of Viacom Entertainment Company. And but Doug and I went to the same summer camp. We're several generations removed. But, really one question crystallized in my mind, which was just the idea of when was your parents met at camp? Is that correct?
They did.
Okay.
They're 16 years old now.
Okay, so there's no doubt that you had to live in that shadow of, oh yeah, that's Doug Herzog. His parents met here, and I want to know the breakout moment for Herzog. Could have been athletics, drama. What was that moment where you broke away from being just the guy that's parents met at Scatico?
Oh gosh, I don't know. I was several generations removed from them, so it was really only the some of the owners of the camp that would have remembered that my folks were there. Camp was a very important time for me. I was there for 11 summers as a camper and a counselor. One of my favorite places on the planet. Some of my greatest memories, all of my best friends, and as I like to always tell people, college was great, really was, but in life, I learned everything I need to know at camp. I learned how to live with people. I learned how to communicate with people. Learned how to get along with people. I learned how to lead people, and those are the kind of skills that really will carry you through life. And so, a real important place for me, and always will be.
Could you talk to the audience about, a specific event of leadership at Scatico, Color War, or anything like that?
Well, people always ask me now, like, what's your job? What do you do? And, so I oversee 3 different networks. So, there's a lot of specific things I'm involved in. But, when you really boil it down, I manage people and processes. And it's really managing and leading, which is what my job is. And I really do believe that all started for me, back at camp. And things like Color War and watching your counselors and your division leaders and then your color water generals and things like that. Watching it was always something I wanted to do, and so I felt like I always wanted to lead, and I watched people do it as a kid, and I guess I was kind of taking notes because I really felt that it was sort of instructive to me going forward. Another thing I always tell people is, they say, well, how do you get to be you? Like, what's the minor league? Like, how do you get to be a network president? And I always say, camp counselor, man. Start with camp counselor.
Right.
You can get 40 10-year-olds on the same page. You can do almost anything. So, I don't know. But leadership is something that, it didn't occur to me till later in life. But as I looked back, it was clear it was something I was interested in.
Just for the record, again, I was a Scatico 87 to 2001. I haven't even ever met you, but I would love to know about some of these could be a couple counselor names that you looked up to, because I am not familiar with that generation.
There were 2 guys in particular, and they were sort of a yin and yang of Scatico at that time. There was a guy named Manny Tunkel, who was a counselor of mine as a young kid. And he was, by the way, he was very sort of musically influential to me. Very, very into music, very into Dylan. He was very into sort of 60s R&B, very into the blues. And he was, so we would have these sings, at camp, as you might remember.
Of course. And,
you had to learn a couple of songs. And he was always teaching us Dylan songs and blues songs and Joni Mitchell songs and Bird songs and playing records for us. And he had long hair. He was a great athlete, a beard. He kind of looked like Jesus at the time. He was a very soulful, spiritual guy. And he was enormously influential, and really, again, musically as well. Both, but very much from a leadership standpoint. He was a very, very good guy, very high moral standards, and he was really influential guy. And the other guy later on was a very good friend of his. They were kind of best friends, and he was more of a fun-loving guy. And his name was Steve Hampton. He was a little crazier, a little like, very spur-of-the-moment guy, always wanted to do the craziest, nuttiest thing, and let's seize this moment and let's make this moment the greatest thing ever. And he was also pretty influential at that time. So it was Manny and the guy they called Steve Hamp's nickname was Heifer. So it was Manny and Heifer. They're two very different approaches, but both very influential.
And it just goes to show, to come full circle. I used to sit outside the canteen sometimes, and just Manny made a Renaissance return during my counselor years.
That's right.
And I couldn't.
Right.
I mean, I would just.
Back, yeah.
I mean, I just remember him sitting there with at the time he said print news. He just had a bushel of New York Times under his arms, and I would just sit there and sort of try to glean information, even though I knew nothing. But I just was like, this cat is really. I can't even imagine what he was like in his glory, because
he was a deep dude, and like I said, he really I love Bob Dylan mostly because of him. We would sit there and talk about music, and sports, forever, and just life. He was a very, very influential guy in my younger years.
I think he played minor league baseball too, actually. But I have to ask you. You have 3 kids, I believe, right? 3.
Yep.
Okay. So, did any of them ever get a chance to actually go to Scatico?
No, they actually, believe it or not, they went to Kenmont, a competing camp.
Are you kidding me? Who made that call?
Yeah,
Who made that call?
We moved to California when my kids were small.
Right.
My wife, who is Irish Catholic, as I like to say, does not come from the Northeast Jewish camping experience. So 2 months always seemed like a way too long for her. And just to make a long story short, ironically, a friend of mine ended up buying Kenmont, turning the camp into 2 separate 1-month programs, and some friends of my kids started going there, so all my kids went there. They all had a great time. I think the Scatico and the 2-month experience is a greater, deeper experience, and I always wish my kids had that. They all loved camp. They all went for 7 summers, but they said anything more than a month would seem like too long to them. Times have changed a little bit, but you can't legislate these things on your kids. I would have loved them to do it. I still tell some of them there's time to be counselors. You should go to Scatico and be a counselor, but we'll see.
Well, before we wrap up this segment on Scatico, when I got to camp, Erwin Fleischner was on the back end of his career, and I always really loved him, but I didn't know him in his prime. And I kind of wanted you. I mean, you were peers with Dave, but I was hoping you could talk about Erwin and sort of the calming influence, just sort of maybe a powerful.
He was a very zen, chill, low key dude. He was quiet and reserved, and certainly never lost his temper. And by that stretch, also never got too excited. And he just had a very, very calming influence on the camp. Very steady, and lovely guy. Always liked him quite a bit. Very, 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 very good guy.
Right, but you were always stirring the pot, though. I mean, you were feisty.
We were, I was there during a period that was a kind of a little bit of a crazy period. Late '60s, mid '70s, and it was a little. I wouldn't say we weren't out of our minds or anything, but. That guy Steve Hamp, sort of had a little bit of a different approach to. He was leading the old divisions at that point. A little different approach. It was a little crazier, but nothing that.
Well, I mean, I'm not going to.
Nothing that I would say when we get off the air.
Exactly. No, you know what? I dig, and there's a perfect segue. You talk about the mid '70s. We got a game on this program called Name That Tune. I want you to.
You're going to embarrass me now. Okay.
Oh, no. Right. You're good.
Go for it.
Let's do it. All right, Mr. Herzog, take a guess.
Now, the woman who introduced the song, when she was speaking, I was certain it was Linda Ronstadt.
Right. You're darn right.
That?
You're spot on, man.
Oh, all right. Because then when they started singing, I just couldn't quite hear, she just wasn't coming through that well when they started singing. I was like, well, maybe it's not Linda. So, it sounded like Linda in the band to me.
Well, what I just love about it is that what a lot of people don't realize, Doug Herzog, a fanatical reggae fan, but there were a lot of white artists. I mean, so many that were obsessed with this brand of music that was filtering in from the islands.
Well, yeah, that was when I started doing my reggae show in college. They had about 15 reggae albums in the library, maybe. This is 1978, I guess, and so I would play whatever I could find. I'd go search in the record shops in Dorchester, and there was actually a good reggae shop run by some white Rastas in Cambridge would give me some records. But then I would play I'd play these rock band versions of reggae songs, and I'd get these calls from the Jamaicans, and they'd just be freaking out, like, "What you play that for, man? That's not the reggae music. Play the roots." So I would play, Hall & Oates doing soldering, or, Linda Ronstadt doing something, or, where, Eric Clapton, and, people would just, because I had to fill the time. I didn't have enough records. But over time, I started to amass enough of the Jamaican 45s and albums to do a pretty good 3-hour slot.
Well, I think that a lot of people know you as a brand because of your success in television, but you really came on the scene at the beginning. I mean, this is where my heart lies, is the beginning of freeform radio, and I just was hoping you could talk about the flexibility that presented itself. I mean, I think that you probably got an FM radio in your dad's car at about 73, so you were pretty much on the cutting edge of. You could play Mahavishnu into.
No, when you turn on the radio, in New York in those days, it was a beautiful thing. There were great FM radio stations. That was, there was WNEW, which was the, sort of the standard bearer. But also, you had a great jazz station in New York. WRVR. There was, WBLS, which is, but even all those, every one of those stations were not so. Even though one was rock, one was jazz, one was, R&B, they were playing all different kinds of stuff. And, you would hear all kinds, you'd hear everything from straight ahead jazz to jazz funk to fusion on the jazz station. You'd hear a lot of that on WBLS as well. You'd hear disco, you'd hear R&B, you'd hear funk, right? And then on the NEW, you'd hear like a lot of what, now is considered classic rock, but, they would, really stretching, and you were hearing a lot of artists that, were mildly or not popular at all back in those days on FM radio. It was great.
Don't you believe that people's ears, regardless if they were, altered consciousness state, it doesn't matter if they were sober or not, just that how much did that variety help people open their minds? Because
it's incredible when I look back how much I actually heard, it's always, I mean, stuff that wasn't crossing over, from the I knew stuff that was, in the 20s to 40s on the R&B charts. It was never going to cross over to the pop charts, and vice versa. And
right.
It was just, because you listened a lot because that's all there was. There was that in your albums. There was no streaming music. There was no CDs. You had to sit with your ear to the radio to hear what you wanted to hear. And if you heard your favorite song, unless you had the record, you did not hear it again until they played it. And it was just a whole different day. So you were listening, I think, closer and more, and they were really, pretty good at that point. It hadn't, that was before the sort of, the tight formats came in. And it was a pretty great day, I think, for radio, for golden years.
Yeah, there were no click tracks, and you actually had real human beings playing the music, which you.
No, people who knew what they were talking about, and and the artists, were on. It was, it was MTV before MTV. It was YouTube before. I mean, that's where you were in your car, you were home, you had the radio on, and you were leaning in because that's all there was.
That Ronstadt clip, "Rivers of Babylon," took place at a venue in Jersey, the Capitol Theater in Passaic.
Spent many nights there.
I want to ask you, did you spend a lot of days there? Do you know what happened during the days there? It was kind of
I actually, for a while there, I went to school around the corner. I went to Passaic Collegiate when I was in 7th.
Oh, my, that's crazy.
The 8th, 9th, and 10th grade, literally spitting distance from the Capitol Theater. They probably showed porn there during the day.
Smut House by day, that's right, exactly.
Yeah. And then, I actually started going even before I was sort of, concert age. They would do sort of, midnight movies, Reefer Madness and, Divine and, Pink Flamingos and that kind of stuff. We would go there for that. I saw Hall & Oates there. I saw the Steve Miller Band there. I saw the Tom Robinson Band there. I'm not embarrassed to say I saw Bette Midler there on her first tour.
Beautiful.
Sure. And if you go on YouTube, it was one of those. It was one of the very first theaters with video capability. So there's a lot of great Capitol Theater shows. including Springsteen, up on YouTube.
Right.
In fact, I actually found the Hall & Oates show I went to in 1976 up there, which was pretty great.
Talking to Doug Herzog here, and we talk about the sort of more rigid formats of radio now, but what do you see as far as music and the dissemination of music and the ability to get stuff out in where are the new mediums going to come from? What are the things that you're looking at and the kind of platforms? Because like we talked about, there was so much fluidity and there were so many tributaries. There was that guy Harry Abramson, who I think that was his name. He had a 6-hour show that could be picked up from Rochester, and he could play 6 hours of Thelonious Monk if he wanted to, or Doug Herzog could play a full side of Mama Africa, and it was all there, and you had time to do it. But where are the platforms that you see where this expansiveness can grow again?
Expansiveness I think is the key word. That's a key element of what's going on now. There's so much music, and there's so much available and so readily available. That's the good news, right? I spent a lifetime collecting music on records and CD and tapes and what have you, and it's all been rendered obsolete because it's now all in my back pocket. But that's also a beautiful thing. Anything I could ever want to listen to, I could pull up in seconds. The hard part, is the curation. I'm a 50-plus music geek, and so, I have to do some work to kind of make sure I can continue to uncover the things that I want, because I don't know that there's a station or, anybody kind of, trying to reach me. So I have to do a lot of hard work. I think if you're my daughter and 17 years old, that's who the world is kind of pointing to. And so whether it's streaming music or YouTube or the radio, they're getting to her, and they get to her a lot of ways. They know where she lives and what she's using and how she's using it. And so I think it's, in a certain regard, more music than ever and easier to get to the consumer than ever. And, now the question is, how do you get the good stuff out there? But it's, and I know they've got their challenges in terms of, how to monetize it all, but I think it's a pretty exciting time for music. I just in the midst of preparing my year-end CD to give to my friends, and now, I started this in 2001, and now in 2014, I hear so much more new music now than I did then, just because of its availability, that, actually constructing the CD and paring it down to the 20, 21, 22 songs, whatever it's going to be, is so much harder now, because I've got now a running list of like 100 songs.
Right.
Whereas, in 2001, I probably had to either have heard the song or have had to go out and physically buy the CD to hear the song that I was interested in to put on. And, that just made the pool smaller, and now the pool's endless.
I'm going to go. I really want to believe that Doug Herzog was at Watkins Glen, but were you too young for that?
Yeah. Too young. That was well, maybe not. I mean, I guess theoretically, I know kids who are running around and things like that at 13, 14. But as I look back, I wasn't. I got to see a lot of cool stuff growing up, a lot of really cool stuff. But I don't think it was necessarily I was in the volume business. First of all, it was hard to get around. Concert tickets were expensive. But I got to a bunch of key stuff, and it really began to my live music experiences certainly started in high school, and then began to really take off a little bit in college. And then when I got to start working, because I was working sort of on the fringes of the music business, and then I really started going out a lot, see music. But I saw some pretty great seminal stuff early on. So
can you talk about? I mean, this is where my soul lies, is the fact that you and when you started to go out in high school. Were you
well, the seminal moment of my life was, October 1975, Kingston, Jamaica. I won't bore you with the details.
No. Tell it.
Suffice to say, my mother found her way down there. She was working as a travel agent at the time, and somebody called her last minute to help get Stevie's equipment down there out of Detroit. And in exchange, she just asked for some tickets to this concert. So it was Stevie Wonder headlining. This is October 75. He's literally in the middle of making Songs in the Key of Life.
Mm-hmm.
Bob Marley is the next act on the bill. Third World was on the bill, as were Harold Melvin the Blue Notes, who ended up not showing. And I don't really think I knew much about Bob Marley before I went down, except I knew I Shot the Sheriff from Eric Clapton. I was a junior in high school. And so we go down there, and we're at the Kingston Sheridan. All these musicians are hanging out. I very much remember seeing Al Anderson, who was Bob Marley's guitarist. I didn't know at the time. Walk around, he had dreadlocks and a leather jacket, which I thought, like, it's like 90 degrees out. This guy's wearing a leather jacket. Like, how cool is that? And the dreads, and of course, everybody's smoking, what they're smoking. And as a 16-year-old, I'm looking around going, this looks like a lot of fun to me. We befriended a guy named Greg Fillingane. Do you know who Greg is?
No, I don't.
Greg is currently the musical director for Stevie Wonder's Songs in the Key of Life tour, which if it comes to your town, you must see. One of the great musical events of my life.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to go for a third time, December 20th, here in Los Angeles. But Greg was just out of high school in Detroit. He was a wonderkin, 17-year-old keyboardist. Stevie had drafted him into the band Wonder Love. It was going to be his first show with Wonder Love. And he befriended me and my sister because we were 16 and 15. And so we're hanging out with Greg. He took us into Stevie's rehearsal the night before the show. We were literally sitting in the front row of the concert. He gave me his camera to take pictures of him because it was going to be his first performance. He went on to an amazing career as actually had a solo record or two in the 80s, but he was in Stevie's band for a long time. He was on the second half of Songs in the Key of Life that were recorded after that concert. Toured with Stevie for many years. Toured with Michael Jackson and the Jacksons for many years, was the musical director of the Victory Tour, toured with Michael for many years, along with Nathan East, was in Eric Clapton's band for many years. Very, very, very accomplished guy. So we met him there. Anyway, we roll into, the National Stadium, and we walk in, and Third World's playing, and even though I didn't know anything about reggae then, I go, well, that doesn't sound that much different. They sounded almost like a disco band.
Right.
And then Bob Marley came on, and, my mind was blown, what I did not realize at the time is also appearing that night with Bob Marley were Peter Tosh and Bunny Wailer, which was kind of lost on me at the time, but as it turns out, it was the last time they ever performed together live. This was Bob's Natty Dread period. I remember one of the songs that, of course, stuck with me as a 16-year-old was Peter Tosh's "Legalize It," and we were. So my mind was blown. Then Stevie played, and my mind was blown again. And then Bob came out and did a couple songs with Stevie, and I was just, it was my first big sort of real huge concert and showbiz experience, and just because I was, got to be, close to it a little bit, I was like, I think I want to be part of this somehow.
That's gorgeous. Yeah, that's beautiful.
On the way at the airport, leaving Jamaica, I bought a copy of Bob Marley's Natty Dread album, and that was it, man. I never looked back. I just became completely immersed and obsessed with the whole thing, and I figured out that The Harder They Come, had been playing as a midnight movie for about 6 months in New York City at the Elgin Theater on 8th Avenue. So I dragged all my friends to see that, and we were just kind of hooked. That reggae thing was just starting to happen, and sort of became my thing. So I got to see Marley and Stevie Wonder. My mom took me to see Al Green, and my mom took me to see Ray Charles and Gladys Knight and the Pips. I went to see Bob Dylan, the band, on that tour at Nassau Coliseum in '74. And then I had all the, my mom, got us sort of into that session band called Stuff at that club Mikells and on the Upper West Side of Manhattan in the mid '70s, and that was a whole other kind of eye-opening experience or ear-opening experience for me.
Yeah, no, I want to. You're giving me a lot of information, right? I mean, was there a club in Patterson, a jazz club, or even in Newark that you would swing?
No, there was a half decent jazz club. I think it was called Gulliver's. It was out, not too far to Patterson. It was, the big guy in town was a guy named Bucky Pizzarelli, who's a legendary jazz guitarist. Sure. His son is John Pizzarelli, now, a well-known vocalist, jazz vocalist. So Bucky was like he was like the guy always playing around town. But, the jazz thing, really developed for me more in college, but my mom was hanging out with some friends. She was divorced, and they had a club called Brody's on Columbus Avenue, and right down the block there was this club called Mikells. And we were into music, and she kind of said, there's this band that plays Mikells, or kind of like the house band there. Like, I could get you guys in. By the way, this was a day when the drinking age was 18. And, we would stroll into that club. No one would ask us for an ID. I was probably 16 years old. I would order a drink. They'd put something down in front of you, and it was just a different day. And this club, Mikells, was very much a big sort of black music industry hangout. This band stuff had sort of created a residency there, and it was Richard T. and Eric Gale and Cornell Dupree and Steve Gadd and Chris Parker and Gordon Edwards. And I remember going to see them the first time, not really sure what to expect, and then I remember they were all sitting. And I'd never been to a jazz club before, and so like the idea of like guys sitting and playing, I was like, wait, what's going on here? Like, just aren't they bands? Because I had only seen rock bands. Like, everybody stands and right. So just watching them play and sit was a weird thing. And they were all a little older. They weren't young guys. They weren't in their 19 or 20s. They were probably all in their 30s, and so they seemed a little older to me. And the whole thing. But then they started playing, and it was just the funkiest, deepest shit you can imagine. And then Chaka Khan would be at the bar, or Phoebe Snow would be at the bar, or Stevie would be at the bar, or Ashford and Simpson would be at the bar, and they'd come up and sing a little bit, and it was just, and then there, like the Cavs. This was during the initial years of Saturday Night Live. You'd see Belushi in there, you'd see Chevy Chase in there, and it just seemed to me like the coolest place on the face of the planet. And we would go whenever we could, and we were like these kids, and we'd come. They let us in, and we'd hang out a little bit and watch a set, or maybe two, and we'd follow them on the road a little bit. They'd play some. They started to get a little popular and playing some dates around town. We made our own stuffed T-shirts, and it was just this thing we were into. And but they never really rose much above being, truthfully, just a great session band in need of a vocalist. But they could, when they were playing, it was just, like deep groove time, and it was a funky good time.
I mean, you're talking about guys that are just. I've interviewed a couple of those guys, and they were. Gadd especially. They were so accessible. That's the other thing, Doug, is that you could literally hang. You were talking about Ashford and Simpson was at the bar, so there was celebrities there. There was a lot of crossover entertainers there, but the idea that you could just go up to Eric Gale or Cornell Dupree, shake their hand, talk to them, and they were just such. Richard T. too. I know Richard T.'s ex-wife. She's married. She's with Jimmy.
Yeah, I met her. Yeah, they were. It's funny. Some of them were friendlier than others, and we were really kids. So it was. We were 16. I think they were sort of a little freaked out by it. And they were pretty. And they're session guys. Like, they're not upfront performers. They're very all low key guys for the most part. Gordon was like more of the personality. He was more of the leader of the band, the bass player, and a little bit of a little bit of personality. Richard a little bit, but they were pretty low key guys. They were musicians. They just wanted to get out there and do their thing and play, and it was a cool thing. It was. I loved the club atmosphere. I loved just getting into the music. I would. It was later on in college I would get into more sort of traditional and mainstream jazz, but just getting introduced to it that way was pretty cool. I used to go see David Sanborn play there. I used to go see John Tropez play there. All those guys were coming through Mikells at that time, and it was cool.
Well, you actually your jazz leanings started to occur before that, so we're going to do another tune. Name that tune. I'm not going to embarrass you. You're going to get this, and then we'll come back and talk about it. Around today.
I was going to say that's a Burt Bacharach, right?
No, but that was.
But is that Freddie Hubbard?
Well, Freddie was on trumpet, but and of course you didn't get a chance to hear the vibes. But that was Milt Jackson on.
Yeah, well, I heard the vibes. So I was thinking it was. So there's got to be a CTI. Milt
exactly.
Jackson, Freddie
Why
Hubbard,
don't you
right?
talk? You of all people. Listen, you talked about in one of your blogs about your ears, your non-evolved ears enjoying that music. Well, I got to tell you, that's where my pocket is. I don't think there's anything unevolved about. I think that stuff is smoking hot. And I wonder, my question is, did you get a chance to go to Van Gelders Studios, because that's where that stuff was being recorded?
No, never did. But that stuff was being played a lot in New York on both the jazz station, WRVR, and also BLS. So, those CTI records, particularly Freddie, George Benson, Diodato, that was just the sound of the day. And, and so that was also around the same time I was going to Mikells and hearing stuff. So it was all sort of coming together that way for me. And I love those records. They hold a special place for me. I loved the look of them. They had a very particular style. If there's anything I actually collect, it's those things. Because I just, as an album, they were. Creed was trying to do something very specific with the photography and the look and a brand, which no one, was really doing at the time. And it was my time, and it was of my time. I loved Esther Phillips, loved Hank Crawford. I loved all those records.
He also...
I dig that stuff.
No, he even brought out, guys like Paul Desmond, who were just straight ahead.
Sure, he brought, Chet Baker he brought back, and Paul Desmond, maybe even Art Pepper at one point with those guys, Kenny Burrell. No, he was, they had a lot of great stuff going on, a lot of great musicians, and like I said, there's sort of a very unique feel to what they do, and a very particular feel. But like I said, it was of a particular time for me, certainly. And so I got to see George Benson back then. I'm trying to remember if I saw any of those other guys. But really love those records.
Can you just talk to the audience about a time in your life when you really weren't sure, but you trusted your gut, and after that you never looked back? Do you remember the first time you trusted your gut on something and took a chance and it worked out?
Wow. I think it was I think it might have been choosing a college.
No.
Yeah. I think that's
go
what
ahead, then explain.
I've been thinking about this a lot because my daughter's at the same, I wanted to go to BU.
My alma mater, yeah.
And my big choices at the time were BU, Syracuse, NYU. Even back then I was pretty certain I wanted to do something in, the world of, what at the time what was referred to as communications, right? TV, film, radio, music, right? I didn't know exactly what, but I knew I wanted to be part of something. And so I started looking at schools that, sort of up and down the eastern seaboard that kind of specialized in that. So there was NYU, there was Syracuse, there was BU. My folks had gone to Syracuse. I'd spent a lot of time there, and I knew it wasn't enough of a city for me.
Mm-hmm.
Felt like Cowtown. New York I loved, and I'd kind of, visiting BU, I'd sort of fall in love with Boston. New York was too close to home. I lived really, 20 minutes outside of Manhattan. And so I sort of circled around BU as my number one choice. So I get into Syracuse, get into NYU. Last school I hear from is BU. And they put me into what they called their College of Basic Studies.
I was in the same one, man. I got,
So I was like, I'm not doing that. I know what I want to do. I don't want to wait a year or two to have to move over into the communication school. I was just cocksure I wanted to, move ahead. And I'd applied to Emerson, which had was even less well-known. I mean, it's come a long way, but it was really not that well-known at all back then. And it was a smaller school and not with a terrific reputation, truthfully, not the kind of reputation it has today. And, I'd actually honestly applied to it as a safety school, not knowing much about it, on the advice of a counselor. So I went back up to Boston to look at Emerson, and I spent the day there, and I just watched all these kids. Emerson's approach is very hands-on. And I just watched kids running around all day making TV shows and making films. And, the radio station was right there in this little building. And I was like, this is me, man. I want to do this. This is where I should be. And it was a very different decision versus the Syracuse, NYU's, BU's that I had kind of been focused on. And, now it's, this is like that. This is now April, right? Of my senior year. So it was like, I think I'm going to do this. And I sort of just pulled the ripcord. And turned out to be one of the great things, that ever happened to me. Met my wife there, really met a lot of great lifelong friends there, and also really carved the path that became my career. So I think that might have been it. That might have been it.
Yeah, well,
the other thing, the
ahead.
showbiz things, taking chances, you do that every day, no one could have told you. Anybody who told you that they thought South Park was going to be the biggest thing ever and be on the air for 16, 17, 18 years, whatever we're up to now, is just lying. What I knew about it was it made me laugh, and I thought it was funny. And one of the reasons we did want to do it was we said, well, at the very least, just because it's so outrageous, we're going to get some attention. And you know what? We just need some attention. And that's, by the way, we thought it was funny,
right.
But, we didn't realize that everybody was going to think it was funny as we did. So, but that's the gig. That's part of the job. You have to do that. And by the way, 99 times out of 100, you're wrong.
Well, I mean, but, it's just the same thing like when I'm tagging Doug Herzog on my picture of Jack DeJohnette after I transcribe his interview about playing with John Coltrane. I'm just trying to get attention. I mean, that's that's part of it is just, I mean, people get a little, you're right, though. I mean, it's about generating that kind of attention. And at the same time, what's really fascinating, Doug, is that broadband. I remember when I went to BU in the late 90s, I mean, they had invested in, I guess it was an AM or maybe FM. I mean, the signal of my radio show never even got out of the communications building. But yet Emerson's was all over the city. I mean, that is
right.
It's profound that someone like yourself at that age where, we really know nothing at 18, 19 years old, and you're cranking, you talked the people into having a radio show at night, and you were all over the city.
Yeah, no, that was one of the big benefits. I mean, we were heard into southern New Hampshire, parts of Vermont, Western Mass. Now that was cool. I would hear from people from all over, and it was at that time it's actually changed just recently, but it was all student run, and and I was doing my show. It started early on Saturday afternoons, but then quickly moved to Sunday nights. And, I was up there, Sunday nights, just me and the engineer all by ourselves, running the place. And, we were bringing live bands up. There's a couple of great live bands in town we'd have come through. And we would, they'd come on for live performances. And then we'd have guests, some of the artists who were coming through town would get up there. And it was great fun. It was my favorite job ever.
Absolutely. No, so you talk about being on the fringes of the music industry, and I'm curious, in your mind, whether it was at Entertainment Tonight or TBS or even going to MTV, who gave you a big break in your career?
My biggest break, again, that goes back to the Emerson thing. My very first job was I worked at the cable news network. They had just launched. That's how long ago it was. It was a very different world then. This was the dawn of cable television. People mostly, thought of the world of TV as three stations and PBS. And a guy who was a little ahead of me at Emerson gave me a job, and we did a little, sort of faux celebrity talk show late at night from LA on CNN, and I sort of made, booking the music guests my thing. And so that was
who were you bringing in? Who were you bringing in?
Oh my God, you name it. Literally. I mean, well, it was the dawn of MTV, so it was like, so I was always interviewing like the Cyndi Laupers and the Boy Georges and the Duran Durans just as they were getting going. I probably did the first American interviews with many of those people. Certainly the first American TV interviews with many of those people. But then, I'm trying to remember. We had. I remember booking Sammy Cohn, who is a very famous Tin Pan Alley songwriter for Sinatra and those guys. Mm-hmm. I booked him with Malcolm McLaren, and which I thought, and they completely hit it off. We had this sort of great discussion between the two of them. I remember Bonnie Raitt coming on to promote the No Nukes movie. I remember going out to Stevie Nicks'. I interviewed Stevie Nicks. I interviewed Tina Turner, who had not yet Tina had not yet exploded back into her 80s prominence, at that time. I mean, pretty much everybody. The music artists were not getting. I had Jonathan Richman up there, which was a legendary appearance. I remember doing the Tubes. Music artists were not getting a lot of play. MTV was just getting going, and most of these people I was interviewing were not going on the Tonight Show, so they were pretty happy to be doing TV interviews and to get on TV. So we talked to everybody. We really did.
Just one final question for you, Doug, before we end this, maybe part one here. I just wanted to ask you, isn't it really about the musician? I mean, the music comes from the music. I think that's what I've done the last 4 years. is just try to reach the musicians, no matter how unsung or how big they became. It's really the person behind the music. It's not it's not the automation. It's not the click track. It's not mechanization. It's stuff. You watch clips of stuff, and I'm like, Herzog was able to sit in the front row to watch Gordon Edwards, every night. I think that is just something that my generation, younger generations, need to know to cultivate that stuff, because that is where love comes from. You know that.
Yeah, well, that's I think that's very important. And for me, I love live music. I go out as much as I can to hear it. There's something about hearing it and seeing it live, and in a perfect world, connecting with that person who's playing it. Whether it's in an arena or in a small club, and it's just something that's important to me. And like I said, it's I'm wired that way. And I've always been interested in the people who make it and where it comes from and how it gets there, and sort of what motivates them.
They'll give the drummer some, Doug,
there you go.
Doug Herzog, thank you so much for being part of the Jake Feinberg Show today, man. I really appreciate it.
No problem, man. This was fun, Jake. I appreciate it.
All right, take it easy.
All right, buddy.
All right. It's the Jake Feinberg Show. We'll see you all in a little bit.
I've been playing blues for quite a while. I've been around the world a few times, but I don't understand. I just like to play the blues. It's not all the money that I want. I just like to play the blues. And I like for everybody to get together and all of us play the blues and let's have a good time. Because